This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, we have got rare good news from the U.S. Supreme Court. Talk about the fate that just befell a Republican who has become one of America's most prolific losers.
Oh, it didn't just befell one, it befell two. Kari Lake had her petition to have her case heard in the U.S. Supreme Court rejected. But you can't sleep on the fact that Mike Lindell was the one who jumped onto this and promised that he had new information and new evidence. And if you recall, originally, he wanted to file the case himself. So they lost in the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court may be conservative, but it's not crazy. And they definitely did not want Kari Lake and Mike Lindell and that cast of crazy coming to the court.
Now, what does it mean that the Supreme Court declined to hear the case? Like, does the Supreme Court have to announce whether or not they'll hear every case that gets appealed to the Supreme Court, or do some just kind of never get heard and fall by the wayside?
Well, no. So if you want your case heard by the Supreme Court, most of them you seek a writ of certiorari, which means you ask the Supreme Court, will you take this case? And we know the Supreme Court picks and chooses which cases it wants. It gets tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of requests to hear cases every term, and it selects only, a few dozen. Oddly enough, Donald Trump seems to get whatever case he wants heard.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court announces when it puts out a list of cases that it is not going to hear, and Kari Lake found herself on that list. The Democracy Docket, I got to tell you, the Democracy Docket team gets excited about a lot of things, but there is nothing they get more excited about than Kari Lake and her sanctioned lawyers and Mike Lindell when they lose. So they went big on this one. I hope everyone reads their coverage.
And of course, I've been following along with the entirety of the coverage from Democracy Docket on exactly this trial. So for those watching right now, if you want to be able to follow along too, make sure to subscribe. I'll put the link to Democracy Docket right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, this case was brought by Kari Lake and Mark Fincham, who, thank God, lost to Adrian Fontes as Arizona's Secretary of State. Will they face any sort of accountability for bringing this kind of a frivolous case? And just beyond that, how is America's favorite pillow salesman, Mike Lindell, involved here?
Okay, so first of all, Kari Lake's lawyers have already been sanctioned in this case and ordered to pay $120,000, which is part of why it's so nuts they went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, they've already been told by lower courts, hey, guys, your lawsuit is so terrible, we are going to sanction you for having filed it. And Mike Lindell comes along with Kari Lake and is like, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're actually going to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. I also have to point out, because it's the absurdity of it all, Mark Fincham, you mentioned the other co-plaintiff here. Mark Fincham didn't just lose his race to
Adrian Fontes. Yeah.
Adrian Fontes. He lost in a landslide. Like the idea that he thought that there was a recount or an election contest or that somehow he had the election stolen is everything you need to know about the Trump era, right? Because he lost by a lot, and yet he wound up in this case as well. Look, we laugh a lot about it, but it's actually quite serious because as much as you and I and everyone watching this realize the joke that is Kari Lake and Mark Fincham and Mike Lindell, and, remember Alan Dershowitz plays a cameo role in this and gets sanctioned, and these other lawyers, like as much as we laugh about them, they have a following. There are people who actually believed when Mike Lindell said, we're going to the U.S. Supreme Court and there's new evidence and this is going to be a blockbuster. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who believed him, who believed that Kari Lake and her nonsense was true. And they believe this because Donald Trump and the Republican National Committee have sold them a lie. And they've sold them a lie now for so many years that a whole generation of Republicans now believe this lie. And that is a toxic recipe for our democracy in the future, because we need people to believe in free and fair elections. We need people to believe that when judges say you have filed a frivolous lawsuit, that in fact they filed a frivolous lawsuit. We need people to believe that when this Supreme Court with 6 conservative justices say, we're not going to hear your case, it's because there's no case to be heard.
Yeah.
But yet we live in a world instead in which there will be more lies, There'll be more election denialism. There'll be more excuses about how this is not the end. Kari Lake will be peddling. This is just the beginning, and
Yeah.
it's really, really sad.
Well, the basis of this lawsuit was that voting machines were too vulnerable, and would allow for inaccurate vote tallies. First off, is that true? And second, are they really suggesting that hand counting is more accurate here?
Look, it's not true. First of all, it's not true. There's like nothing about this lawsuit that's true. I mean, nothing about this lawsuit is correct. The fact that they are not just suing, under one theory, they have multiple theories. They wind up, the Republicans in Maricopa County who actually run the elections have gotten, frankly, some of the worst of the vitriol that Kari Lake and these folks have put forward. Nothing about this is true. Remember, these are the folks who started by proclaiming that the reason why Donald Trump lost in Arizona was because of Sharpie pens.
Yeah.
Then it turned out there were no Sharpie pens. Then they were researching or investigating whether there were Chinese bamboo filaments in the ballot paper. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, nothing about this has been true. And a hand recount would not be more accurate. But I think actually, the more I have focused on what they are saying and what they are claiming, if there was a hand recount, they would claim that the hands were wrong. Right. Like the fact is, Kari Lake lost. Mark Fincham lost by a lot. And Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. But there's no amount of common sense. There's no amount of rationality. There's no amount of Republicans saying that it's true that will ever undermine the lie, because the lie is meant to never be undermined. The lie builds upon itself. In fact, the genius of Donald Trump and the genius of many authoritarians is that the very fact that the lie can never be unproven goes only to strengthen people's belief in the liar.
Perfectly put. Yeah, I think it's worth noting too, just on the quick point of hand counting ballots, that these are the same people who wail about ballots not being counted on election night, who now are engaged in a lawsuit to render useless machines. And so they want to count every ballot by hand while still claiming that they're upset that every ballot isn't counted by election night, and they want to do away with the one tool that would allow them to actually do that.
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I hope people pay attention to that. You're right. At the same time that Republicans say every ballot needs to be counted on election day, by the stroke of midnight, hundreds of millions of ballots across the country have to be counted, and that's the only way to have free and fair elections, and anything else is fraudulent. At the same time they're saying, oh, and by the way, we need every ballot to be counted by hand. It would take weeks and months to count every ballot by hand.
All the while, by the way, the army of people you would need to actually count these ballots, all the while they're pushing forward with lawsuits to invalidate prohibitions against harassing elections workers. So they're making it easier to harass elections workers, while at the same time trying to like usher in a policy where they would need God knows how many hundreds of thousands of election workers to actually accomplish an election with no voting machines. None of it makes sense. Your earlier point, like chaos has always been the point. It has nothing to do with logic or reason here. It is just pandemonium for the sake of pandemonium. It's self-sabotaging. It doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, it's not supposed to.
That's right. It is, the genius of it is that it doesn't. And the audience for it finds the fact that it doesn't make sense as just another conspiracy, right? The fact that it doesn't make any sense to them, the conclusion is not that it doesn't make any sense, but that there's some deeper conspiracy going on. It's actually quite tragic for democracy. You and I laugh about this sometimes to keep going, but it's actually quite tragic for our democracy, because we count on people having a hard-fought election, but then at the end, everyone win, lose, or draw, sort of moving on. And we have now entered into we are about to enter the fourth year of conspiracies about the 2020 election, and we have not even resolved those conspiracies, no less the ones that Kari Lake is still spreading about the 2022 election. It's just like one rolls into the next.
Well, it kind of, all of that underscores how important it is to fight back against these people who have made election denialism kind of the backbone of their entire political identity. So, that kind of underscores the importance of the work that Marc and his team do in the courts. If you want to support their work, please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet they founded to focus on everything voting and elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.